Hey, it's the Comics Kid 2099, and as always, on Saturdays, I'm here to discuss an episode of a superhero animated series. Today, I'll be talking about the two-part Batman the Animated Series episode, The Demon's Quest. But before I get into the actual review, I'll sum up what happened for those who haven't seen the episode, and for those who have, but maybe have forgotten stuff. And it goes without saying, but spoilers abound. Robin is kidnapped, and Batman has no leads. When Ra's al Ghul enters the Batcave, he tells Batman that whoever kidnapped Robin kidnapped his daughter Talia as well. They team up to find who did this, and shortly, Batman reveals that Ra's was behind the whole thing as part of a very elaborate test to see if he was worthy to be Ra's successor. Ra's wants to save the planet, but doesn't care about humanity, and is willing to let millions die to achieve his goals. When Batman refuses to be Ra's heir, Ra's declares him an enemy. Batman then stops Ra's from killing so many people to save the planet, and Ra's seemingly dies, but we see at the end of the episode that he is in fact still alive. Cue credits. This episode is written by Denny O'Neil and Len Wein, which is fitting as the overall plot is based very heavily on the early Ra's al Ghul stories from the 1960s and early 1970s, and O'Neil and Wein are two of the masterminds behind the Batman comics of that era. And while some of the episodes of this series, like The Laughing Fish, are loosely based on stories from the comics, they actually deviate quite a bit from what happened in the original comic book story. But this episode is very true to the story that introduces Ra's, and that's not always important. A lot of people erroneously think that the comics are always better because they came first, which is definitely not true. But in this case, the stories that introduce Ra's in the comics are fantastic, and I'm glad to see that this episode stays pretty faithful to those comics. The only real deviation in the plot comes when the episode needs to streamline things a little bit, like how it removes the death of Kathy Kane, or how it introduces a big human life-ending disaster for Batman to thwart at the end of the episode. And even this big catastrophe that Batman stops is so that the episode can feel like it has some kind of resolution. In the comics, when Batman says no thanks to Raz's offer, it usually just ends with, fine, then we're enemies, and then Batman gets to go on his merry way, knowing that he has another bad guy in his rogues gallery. So those changes this episode does make don't really bother me that much. This episode is pretty dang epic, and is one of the few two-parters in this series that I actually feel like deserves to be a two-parter, but that doesn't mean that it's flawless. One thing I only realized when watching this episode is that Ra's al Ghul is super sexist. He has a daughter who is very capable and could very easily lead his organization, as we saw in Grant Morrison's near-decade-spanning Batman run, but Ra's thinks that he needs a man to keep her in place and do things for him when he's gone. Of course, we would have very little conflict and story in this episode if Ra's was more progressive in his views toward women, but it is still a little shocking. Maybe not that a centuries-old dude is sexist, as that isn't all that surprising, but that I never realized how sexist he is until now. And this episode does fall into that problem that I've always had with the Ra's, Talia, Batman triangle. We're told that Talia is in love with Bruce, who she has met exactly one time, and in that entire encounter, she was playing him like a fiddle also that she could serve her father's plans. I just find it extremely unlikely that a chica like Talia would see Bruce one time and fall in love with him. This really feels like a subplot that would have benefited from several encounters with Talia, and a more serialized approach to this series where a more organic love story could slowly develop between the two, or at the very least from her side of things and not so much from Batman's. While this is handled slightly better in the comics because there have been more encounters between the two over time, it's not much better. This episode also really fails on utilizing the character of Robin. As in the comics that introduced Ra's, this episode only really uses Robin as a plot device to get Batman into the story. I was really expecting Robin to be more involved in the story after Batman rescues him, but sadly that was not meant to be. When they go to Ra's desert base, Robin just chills out in the Batplane while Batman does all of the hard work. With such a huge organization to infiltrate, and the fate of the world hanging in the balance, you would think that Robin would have done a little bit more to help. I don't often talk about the voice talents in these reviews, but man, David Warner really kills it as Ra's al Ghul. There have been other good Razes, but Warner might just be my favorite just because of his command of presence that he gives here. That is about all I have to say about this episode, guys. I really enjoyed it, despite the flaws that were present. With some of these problems, I don't know how I would have gone about fixing them, as they would present new problems in telling the story if they were fixed or removed, but some of them could have been pretty easily fixed. So what did you guys think of this episode, and of my review? If you liked this video, you'll be happy to know that next week I'll be talking about an episode of Batman Beyond, and the week after I'll be talking about another episode of Batman the Animated Series. And if you did like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. In the meantime, I'll see you guys next week with some other kind of videos. Take care.